Greetings, YouTube. The race, gender, and sexual orientation of any person, yourself or anyone else, should not be a political topic. They should just not exist on the political spectrum. But as a wise person once said in the past, everything is politics. And so because of social conservatism, those topics, race, gender, and sexual orientation, are in fact political hot potatoes. And social conservatives are more than willing to use those topics to harm others. They will go out of their way to make sure that people are discriminated against on racial lines. We have so many levels of institutionalized racism in America. It is stunning, um, to the point where it has become so ingrained in our society that those same institutionalized attitudes on race have found their way into the actual fabric of the lives of the people who are adversely affected by that racism. What do I mean by that? An example of this would be how people look at a black child and they think the black child is 4 to 5 years older than the child actually is. So they could be looking at a 12-year-old, but in their head, they're thinking that's a 17-year-old. And that holds true even for black people because we have ingrained that level of racism into our society so deeply that it has worked its way into the actual lives of black people and their own attitudes about members of their own race. That's twisted. It's why a child in a park was shot within 2 seconds of a cop showing up, even though that kid was 12, holding a toy gun. 2 seconds. I've watched the tape many, many times. 2 seconds. And then, of course, we have gender, because in Western culture, and actually many cultures, women are considered at best second-class citizens. They are not given the same rights and privileges as men are, and that was a system designed by intention by men because they wanted to be on top. Now, whether that's because of their own fears of emasculation, their jealousy of the fact that they cannot create life in the same way that a woman can, I don't know the reasons for all the root causes of misogyny. I'll be honest about that. But we know it's existed for a very long time because these institutions have existed for a very long time. I saw something interesting yesterday in that the word emasculation, or a man has been deprived of the characteristics that are most closely associated with masculine biological expression, um, doesn't exist for women. There is no linguistic equivalent of emasculation. That's interesting, now isn't it? And then, of course, you have sexual orientation. And the majority is always going to consider the minority to be aberrant and is going to treat them as such. Uh, and unfortunately, we have criminalized that behavior in the past. We have said flat out that if that you were a person that expressed your sexuality in a way that society doesn't approve, with another consenting adult, that you could be ostracized at best. At worst, you could be jailed. There are even laws about the type of clothing you wore. You had to have a minimum number of pieces of clothing that the government had decided were the appropriate type of clothing for your biological form to wear. So if you were a cisgender man and you were found to be wearing feminine clothing, or at least society thought you of you as a cisgender man, and you were found to be wearing feminine clothing, you could be arrested unless you had a minimum number of masculine pieces of clothing on us at the same time. Yes, it made no sense at the time, and saying it out loud now shows you how much it doesn't make sense now. Because these kinds of hair splitting destroyed lives, but were also absurd. Fabric has no gender. How you dress is nothing to do with your gender or your sexuality. It's just how you dress. And whether you have a piece of clothing on the lower body, which is a tube, or a piece of clothing which is two tubes, um, it's still clothing on your lower body. But society has said that the single tube clothing can only be worn by the feminine people, and the two tube clothing should be worn by the masculine. In fact, remember in America it considered inappropriate or even illegal for women to wear trousers in public. It was illegal. It was not allowed by congressional policy, congressional guidelines for women to wear pants until the 1990s. Think about that for a minute. How many of you were alive when that policy existed? It's goddamn absurd. But lives have been ruined by all of these absurd restrictions, whether it is race, gender, or sexual orientation, when none of these things should have any impact on you at all. But they do. It's why I strive to be an intersectional feminist, because I understand that all of these things are very complicated. They interact with each other depending on the social situation, depending on the relationship between the people involved, depending on how people were raised from different cultures at different times, in different places. The lives of a black trans woman is significantly different than the life of a black gay man, even though they're both black, even though they're both technically in the queer spectrum. Their lives are still different. And they're different from a white lesbian. You know, that's completely different life, even though in the same spectrum. One of the things that I've encountered many times when talking about privilege, particularly white privilege, is that people will then give the example of a white homeless dude. And they love to compare the white homeless dude to Michelle Obama. That's a famous one. Probably it's a holdover from the Obama administrations, of course. But they like to compare those two because they have to compare chalk and cheese. And whenever they do that, I ask them, okay, if you're going to be, if you have find yourself being a homeless person, would you rather be a white man or a black man? Would you rather be a black man or a black woman? Would you rather be a black woman or a black trans woman? Very quickly, they can understand what intersectional feminism is, because that is an example of how the same social level can still have vastly different lived experiences depending on who you are. So yeah, don't compare chalk to cheese. Let's compare cheese to cheese. And you see that being a white dude is still always better in America than pretty much being anything else. So I wish these weren't political topics. I really do. But they are. And so we have to make sure that we remember that. We have to make sure that we never let it slip from our mind that there will always be people who are going to use race, gender, and sexual orientation as part of their political machinations. They are going to make sure that the systems that protect their particular position in life remain in place. That those institutions, that those laws, that those social mores all continue to exist. And the sad thing is, far too many liberal people are center-right conservatives that are happy with the status quo because the status quo says that they are A-okay. And as long as they're never made uncomfortable, they're willing to put up with the fact that there are all these huge swaths of society whose lives are being made miserable every day because it doesn't affect them, which is sad, and why I make a very pointed effort to call myself progressive, to tell people that I am a democratic socialist, that I am not someone satisfied with the status quo. It makes me less popular. I know that's shocking that something could actually make me less popular. So let's talk about race, gender, and sexual orientation. I'm sure the comment section will just be full of rainbows and sunshine.